And I'm joined now by Genevieve Wood, a former spokesperson for the Republican National Committee, and Chris Kofinis, Democratic strategist. So, Genevieve, you heard Anthony saying there, if only Donald Trump had put in such a good performance in the first debate, isn't there a lesson for him going into the second debate there, that Mike Pence was disciplined, he was on message, he didn't rant, he was persuasive?
Yeah, no, I thought, look, I was very proud of Mike Pence tonight. I actually was not surprised because I've talked to him a number of times, and he delivered like I think he always does. He knows his policy. He's a good presenter of that policy. And I think, you know, to Anthony's point, I don't know how many people were watching after the first 30 to 40 minutes because, frankly, you should have been moderating this. She lost control at different points. And some of that was Tim Kaine, I will say, jumped in, I think, a little bit too much. But
well, they were both talking over each other.
But they began to both talk over each other. And frankly, that was a disappointment. As it went on, I think we got into a little bit more substance and it got better. I hope more people stuck with it.
Well, Chris Kofinis, is interesting, just looking on Twitter at some of the people that were doing focus groups of undecided voters. The undecided voters were saying that Tim Kaine was interrupting a bit too much and they felt he was a bit robotic in his talking points, whereas Mike Pence was more natural. Maybe that radio show host coming through.
I think, you know, our firm usually does focus groups for these kind of debates. We chose not to for the VP one, primarily because it's usually not as exciting, and to some extent that lived up to expectations. Part of the challenge, and I think when you're doing a debate, there's a tone and then a substance part of the reaction that you know, voters are going to have. And I think when you're interrupting, whether, you know, in terms of, and both were doing it, it kind of rubs people wrong a little bit. And that, I think, was the major mistake that Trump made in that first debate. And to some extent, I think, stylistically, Pence was calm, he was measured. You know, they both got in their core talking points. They both got what they wanted from this. For Pence, it was, look, the insane ticket is kind of sane, right? Well, I'm not sure that's really going to fly, but, you know, that was his goal. You know, for Kaine, it was to come in and to continue to argue all the reasons why you cannot vote for a Trump-Pence ticket.
And, of course, central to that on the Democratic side is this key question of Donald Trump and his taxes. That was, of course, a question that Mike Pence was expecting. But, of course, all week, ever since the New York Times revealed that Donald Trump apparently wrote off nearly $1 billion in tax and didn't pay taxes for almost, or perhaps didn't pay taxes for almost 20 years, this question of when he releases his tax return is coming up. And this is what Mike Pence had to say. He defended Donald Trump's use of the tax system.
He faced some pretty tough times 20 years ago. But like virtually every other business, including the New York Times not too long ago, he used what's called net operating loss. We have a tax code, Senator, that actually is designed to encourage entrepreneurship.
But why won't he release his tax return?
Well, we're answering the question about the business thing.
I do want to come back on this.
His tax returns, that showed he went through a very difficult time. But he used the tax code just the way it's supposed to be used, and he did it brilliantly.
How do you know that? You haven't seen his tax return.
Because he's created a business that's worth billions of dollars today.
How do you know that?
Well, Tim Kaine didn't miss his opportunity, and he questioned why Donald Trump wasn't releasing his tax returns.
He said, if I run for president, I will absolutely release my taxes. He's broken his first promise. Second, he stood on the stage on the stage last week, and when Hillary said you haven't been paying taxes, he said, that makes me smart. So it's smart not to pay for our military. It's smart not to pay for veterans. It's smart not to pay for teachers. And I guess all of us who do pay for those things, I guess we're stupid. And the last thing I'll say
Senator,
is this.
Do you take all the deductions that you're entitled to?
The last thing I want to ask Governor Pence is this. Governor Pence had to give Donald Trump his tax returns to show he was qualified to be vice president. Donald Trump must give the American public his tax returns to show that he's qualified to be president, and he's breaking his promise.
So a very feisty exchange there over taxes. Genevieve, this question was coming, Donald Trump and his tax returns. Mike Pence was eloquent, but did he really convince the voters out there who want Donald Trump to release his tax returns?
Probably not. But let me tell you, and on the record, I wish Donald Trump had released these a long time ago. This should have been out of the way a long time ago. That said, I think that this issue is hurting Donald Trump less than it would have hurt Mitt Romney and some other folks. And I tell you why. Number one, people know the tax system in this country needs major reform. They know that people people up and down the ladder and a lot of folks at the top have lawyers and accountants to take account of all these loopholes.
$1 billion worth of loopholes.
And they also know Donald Trump has been very upfront about that. I mean, he's actually been a politician who said, you're right, the tax system works for folks like me. I've used it. I better than anybody know that. I think he has been more honest about those kind of things. Just like he said in the past, yeah, I've given to politicians on both sides because I know how that works. I think people appreciate that a little bit more. So I don't think this is hurting him as much as it would hurt a lot of other candidates, but I do wish he had just released him and gotten it over with.
Chris Kofinis, do you feel that Tim Kaine was just a little bit too keen to get in there and attack on the taxes? And because Mike Pence had a defense, I mean, you might think it's a bogus defense, but he was eloquent and, again, calm in the way he presented it.
I kind of see it a couple different ways. One, it is beyond the pale that someone who's running for president, when every other president has done it, Republican and Democrat, that he refuses. There is a problem with that. Because it raises questions, even if they're questions that could be easily answered, but you have to release them to be able to give legitimacy to the answer. That's one point. The part about the $1 billion loss, to me, it's not the question. From my focus, the fixation on releasing the taxes only gets you so far, right? People have heard this for 6 months. They've heard it for a year. Whoever is really going to be influenced by this has already moved, right? Now, to me, the most significant damaging fact that came out from that release, or I should say that story in the New York Times, was the fact that he lost $1 billion. Right. So here's a guy who talks about, and I've seen this in our focus groups where people talk about, well, why do you like Trump? Well, I think he's a successful businessman. Well, if you lose $1 billion, I can tell you, having a small business, you're not a successful businessman.
Well, I'm right. When you're at that level, small business dealing with billions.
And yet he's up, isn't he, in Ohio? It's interesting, even after his poor debate performance. So, Genevieve, do you feel that this tax issue can be put to bed ahead of Sunday's crucial debate?
Not a chance.
No, look, I'm sure Hillary's going to bring it up again, but the challenge is, she's got all these emails she hasn't released. I mean, both candidates have got some documents that the American public would have liked to have seen them release. Let's just be honest about that. So they can both go back and forth at it, and both can talk about how I was proven.
Doesn't the paying taxes resonate more with voters? We all have to pay taxes.
That's right, and most people hate paying those taxes, and they like the fact that he said, yeah, I was a smart guy. And look, he has paid taxes. It's just not all the federal taxes that everybody would like to see him pay. But here's reality. Most people have not been able to get away, and I think Mike Pence made this argument quite well on the email server question. Most people couldn't get away with what Hillary Clinton got away with. And while people may have questions about its tax information, I think there are a lot more questions about Hillary's trustworthiness, and we see that in all the polls. So I think this is an issue that at the end of the day, it can kind of wash out, but my guess is it'll come back up Sunday night.
Well, now people care a lot about taxes, but there was really a big amount in this debate on foreign policy, wasn't there? Yes. Which was all extremely substantive and a lot of hammer and tongs on that. So, for example, Mr. Pence said that America needed to stand up to Russian aggression. Here's what he had to say.
After the Russian reset, the Russians invaded Ukraine and took over Crimea. And the small and bullying leader of Russia is now dictating terms to the United States to the point where all the United States of America, the greatest nation on earth, just withdraws from talks about a ceasefire while Vladimir Putin puts a missile defense system in Syria, while he marshals the forces and begins. Look, we have got to begin to lean into this with strong, broad-shouldered American leadership. It begins by rebuilding our military.
Well, you can't really escape, though, can you, Genevieve, from the fact that there are a lot of accusations about Donald Trump cozying up to Russia.
Well, the fact is he hasn't talked as negatively about Mr. Putin and Russia as I think Mike Pence did tonight. I would personally like to see Donald Trump sound more like Mike Pence when he talks about Russian policy.
Maybe he should be running for president.
Well, interesting what you saw on Twitter tonight about that. But yeah, no, I think that Mike Pence gave a very strong defense of where most Republicans are on that. And let me say about Donald Trump on this issue, but on others. This is not a guy who's been in politics in terms of being a professional politician. He's made some statements that are kind of tough to defend here and there. But I think the difference in what people see is They may say, you know what, he knows there's something wrong with the way we do trade in this country. He knows that we are a weaker player on the stage than we were before this past administration was in office. And people buy into that. Does he have all the details yet about how he's going to fix all of the things? No. So they start looking at, well, who do you put around you who's going to advise you? I think Mike Pence did an excellent job tonight of convincing people that's a good advisor.
Well, we'll see, but
details?
yeah, it's true. But Chris Kofinis, this question that Pence was really hammering home tonight, he's trying to link what he sees as America's weak position in the world to Hillary Clinton's tenure as Secretary of State. Do you think that's going to hurt her?
I mean, I think it's gonna play to the base, which is what what he was clearly trying to do there. I mean, the problem for Donald Trump is when you talk about his foreign policy vision, there is none. When you talk about his policy details, there are none. And this notion that someone who's running for president of the United States, with all respect, details are everything, right? It's not a rhetorical job. You actually have to have the experience, the judgment, the knowledge. And when, and people kind of laugh at it because it's a good zinger, but when Hillary Clinton says, if you respond to a tweet, right, with such intemperament, how are you going to be president of the United States when people are going to be burning you in effigy? That is not just a rhetorical response. That actually, I think, is a real, legitimate, serious question. And so what I think we've seen in this entire race, both in the primary and the general, the reason why so many Republican leaders, including former President Bush, right, who are refusing to endorse the Republican nominee. Now, I've been in politics a long time. I know you've been in politics a long time. I've never seen or heard of such a thing. They're not doing that out of spite. They're doing it because they look at the man, they look at how he acts. And when you talk about foreign policy, and to me, especially given the audience, that really is the most important area. Domestic policy, you're going to be checked and balanced by Congress, by the Supreme Court. But when it comes to foreign policy and military policy, that is where a president, as commander-in-chief, has enormous power. And to take such a free will with your words and your antics is a reflection of who Donald Trump is and why people are so scared of him being president.
Let's just move on to something else that we could, Genevieve. Speaking of the free use of words, of which there's been a lot of in this campaign, so there was, for example, that whole business about the insult, about Hillary Clinton calling the Trump supporters, a basket of deplorables. And she really, Tim Kaine really had to defend that. But this is what Tim Kaine had to say about Mr. Trump's campaign insults.
Donald Trump during this campaign has called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He's called women slobs, pigs, dogs, disgusting. I don't like saying that in front of my wife and my mother. He attacked an Indiana-born federal judge and said he was unqualified to hear a federal lawsuit because his parents were Mexican. He went after John McCain, a POW, and said he wasn't a hero because he'd been captured. He said African Americans are living in hell, and he perpetrated this outrageous and bigoted lie that President Obama is not a U.S. citizen. If you want to have a society where people are respected and respect laws, you can't have somebody at the top who demeans every group that he talks about.
So, Genevieve Wood, you can't have someone at the top who demeans every group. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I say this debate is about policy and election. And the reason that Tim Kaine wanted to focus on that tonight was because he didn't, frankly, want to have to focus on the policies of Hillary Clinton. I mean, we were just talking about foreign policy, and you could say, well, Donald Trump's got these tweets. Well, Hillary Clinton has this record, and that record is not a very good one when you look at the foreign policy stage. And where you look at where America is today, where you look at where ISIS is today, you want to talk about North Korea, this Congress, including the vast majority of Democrats, had to pass legislation to get the Obama administration, including Hillary Clinton, to actually enforce the sanctions that we had against that regime.
We're talking about a man running for president who
I understand, but he
sways of the election.
Well, people, no. This isn't about. No. What I'm saying is, I would rather have to say, yeah, people, and I said this at the top. Donald Trump has said some things that are very hard to defend at times, and I wish he wouldn't say them. But that is much easier to defend, in my view, when I know what I think his policies are going to be, than it is to defend a record that has not worked.
Okay, so Chris, just to move to this question, where Hillary Clinton was accused by Mike Pence tonight of insulting millions of Americans by saying that people who support the Trump campaign, some of them are a basket of deplorables.
Listen, I think that the difference, and I think this was one of the key moments, I think, in the debate. I think it was one of the best moments for Senator Kaine. When Secretary Clinton said that, I'm not going to defend it because I didn't think she should have said it. But the difference was she came out the next day and said it and acknowledged it. Name me once in this entire primary and general election where Donald Trump has apologized for every offensive remark he has made. He engaged after a relatively weak performance, and I'm being kind, in that first debate. Instead of doing what normal professional candidates do, which is, okay, why did we do bad? How do we get ready for the second one? He engaged in a Twitter battle with a Miss Universe. And this is a man who wants to be president of the United States. This is how bad this election, this is how sad it is to live here right now.
Well, that's one view, but Genevieve,
where are you
let's just
No, I'm not going to move anywhere, but it's a sad statement. In all seriousness, it's a sad statement when you have someone running for president who thinks this is how you talk to the American people.
He's got a big chance to talk to the American people on Sunday. The second debate is coming up. Genevieve, how do you see tonight's debate, which probably won't be watched by anything like the 84 million who watched the first debate and as many as will watch the second debate, but how is it going to affect the framing and Donald Trump's preparation for that second debate?
Well, I think this was a great night for the Republican ticket. I think Mike Pence did them very proudly. And I think Donald Trump should take some lessons from Mike Pence in the sense of, look, they don't have the same demeanor. He's not going to get up there and be as calm as Mike Pence was. And I don't think most Americans who support him would want him to do that. Having said that, I think Mike Pence took every opportunity to work in what are the differences between our policy vision and yours. Whether you agree with them or not, here are the differences. I don't think Donald Trump did that the first debate, and that was a missed opportunity.
Okay, Chris Kofinis, what does this debate mean for Hillary Clinton and her performance on Sunday night?
You know, I don't know, because to be honest, I think Kaine had a job to do, which was to kind of discredit Trump and his policies and positions, which I think he did a good job at. But the next debate is a challenge for both candidates, if we want to be honest. It's a town hall debate. It's a very different type of debate because you have a room full of undecided voters. You can't get into that kind of nasty back and forth where you can if you're just standing there on the stage with a room full of people who ask you the question, then you turn around, ignore the person, and engage in a back and forth. That will backfire on whomever kind of leads. So they've got to be, I think, more positive, more substantive, more issue-focused.
They do indeed. Chris Kofinis, Genevieve Wood, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone for watching this BBC News special on the vice presidential debate.